who's going to help us and tell us how we fight against oppression. Our dear brother, Mozambique. Takbir! Takbir!
今天活动谁组织的？知道吗？有没有那个采访通知的？
That since my return and release from Guantanamo Bay against the torturous and oppressive policies of the so-called war on terrorism that has in de facto terms targeted you and the Muslim community around the world. When I was held in Guantanamo, I was held with 22 Uyghurs from East Turkestan in China, the Xinjiang province. And they say every single one of those Uyghurs who were held and tortured by the Americans, they say, thank God, thank Allah that we were not handed over to the Chinese. Despite the torture and the abuse that I have been fighting for 15 years, I stand in front of you today to say that what the Chinese government has done in the name of the war on terrorism, because Xi Jinping, the leader of China, has used and utilized the language of George Bush's war on terrorism in order to enable this genocide of the Muslims in East Turkestan. It's important we understand this on the day that Donald Rumsfeld, the man who was the chief architect of the war on terror, died on this day. On this very day that the Chinese Communist Party celebrates its centenary, we commiserate what they have done to our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan. This systematic targeting of Muslims on the basis of their faith, removal of the ability to practice their faith, the shutting down of mosques and turning them into museums, banning people from fasting in Ramadan. In fact, some of the Uyghur brothers say to me this, think about this. You know, me and Cage have been campaigning against the Islamophobia for all of this time. And we say that Islamophobia in this country and beyond is rampant. Yet the Uyghurs say, we wish that we suffered the kind of Islamophobia that you do in the West. Imagine that for context. Imagine being forced to renounce your Shahada. Imagine being forced to learn the Chinese Communist Party manifesto in place of Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Imagine that for a second. Imagine being forced to drink alcohol. Imagine being forced to eat pork. Imagine being sent to a concentration camp and your children being sent to an orphanage while the child's parents are alive. That's what this government is doing. When they held a tribunal, a people's tribunal in this city, where people came from East Turkestan to give evidence as to the torture and the oppression they faced, that tribunal was headed by the man who headed the tribunal in prosecutions for the genocide of the Muslims in Bosnia. That's how serious this is, my brothers and sisters. So when we use the term genocide, we do not use it lightly, but that is what is happening. And if that is what is happening, we must say, dear brothers and sisters, no more. It must stop. And finally, I will say this. Most of us here, a large number of us, come from Muslim countries. And it is to our shame that the leaders of the Muslim world didn't only not condemn the Chinese government for what it did, they endorse the Chinese government's treatment of the Uyghurs. That is a shame. For every single Muslim that stands here, you must send a message back to those governments. We stand here today in London, united together. Our different creeds and colours, our different organizations, our different backgrounds and age groups. And we stand as one and we say, no to genocide, no to torture, no to oppression. Takbir! Allahu Akbar! Takbir! Allahu Akbar! Takbir! Allahu Akbar! I think that set the tone nicely. We're going to ask our dear Sheikh Abu Anas to come up to recite a few words of the Kalam of Allah, the Quran. He's just going to come up now, inshallah. Stop! Stop! Genocide! Stop! Stop! Genocide! Stop! Stop! Genocide! Stop! Stop! Genocide! China! China! You can't hide! China! China! You can't hide! Genocide! أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والسماء ذات البروج واليوم الموعود وشاهد ومشهود. قتل أصحاب الأخدود النار ذات الوقود إذ هم عليها قعود وهم على ما يفعلون بالمؤمنين شهود. وما نقموا منهم إلا أن يؤمنوا بالله العزيز الحميد الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض والله على كل شيء
全都移到这儿了。
Guys, keep here open, free, huh? crossing has to be further down or further down. Excuse me. The crossing needs to be clear. Still needs free access. No. This whole area needs to be clear.
Hi everyone. Welcome to our protest. I've been asked by the police to say we need to keep this clear before we get started. Thank you. So first of all, I would like you all to give yourself a big round of applause for one specific reason. We've been protesting here for a year today, every Friday with a lot of you. So for all of you who have come regularly, give yourself a round of applause for keeping it up. I'm Colombe, I'm the co-founder of Now, an organization that has been organizing those protests for a year today after the introduction of the national security law in Hong Kong. We hosted protests in London, in Tel Aviv. We hosted protests in Japan, in Malaysia, in South Africa. We've been hosting protests all across the world to ask world leaders to do more. To do more for democracy and for freedom. And today, we are joined by incredible speakers from a lot of different countries and from a lot of different struggles who will tell you why we need to keep up the pressure. Today marks the 1-year anniversary of the national security law, and you all know what this means. 128 people have been arrested under it. Apple Daily just stopped functioning. Politicians have been stopped from working. So today, we remember those that have made great sacrifices, and we regroup and get ready to protest again. I'm keeping my intro short because, as I said, we have incredible speakers. So let me just introduce them, and then I'll hand them the mic. The first speaker we'll get is Simon Cheng from Hong Kongers in Britain. And I'm giving you the mic in a single second. Then we'll hear from Benedict Rogers from Hong Kong Watch. We'll also hear from Luc Depulfo, the coordinator of EPAC. We'll hear from Chawa Wang, a Chinese human rights defender. We'll hear from Lincoln Chong from Justicia Hong Kong. We'll hear from Jaya Patak, the co-executive director of Yet Again UK. And we'll close the protest with Andrea, my co-founder from Now. But give it up for Simon.
Thank you. 光復香港！光復香港！我哋要大聲啲，話俾大使館入邊嘅人員同新嘅大使知道，新嘅大使就係中國嘅外交部嘅副部長，所以我哋要話俾中國嘅政府知道，香港人民嘅聲音係唔會被磨滅。光復香港！光復香港！為咗令到更多嘅外國人知道我哋香港人嘅訴求咧，所以我喺呢度咧用非常簡短嘅時間咧，用英文去回顧，亦都去講解過去1年，因為呢一個港區國安法為我哋香港帶嚟覆天翻地嘅改變。Today, after 1 year since the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law, is the saddest day ever for all Hong Kong people. Coincidentally, today is also 100 years after the Chinese Communist Party have been set up. And it will be the saddest days to all Chinese people as well. As the Hong Kong National Security Law criminalizes all dissenting thoughts and speeches, such an ill-defined law crumbles the public confidence to the basic law which guarantees the certain freedoms in Hong Kong. After cleansing all dissents of all walks of life, pushing all pro-democracy activists and politicians either in jail or in exiles, disqualifying all oppositions, politicians from public offices, arresting and harassing the journalists and the freedom speakers, shutting down all the media which are not with the government, brainwashing
the younger generations of Hong Kong imposing patriotic education, promoting the officials who are notorious with their suppressive tactics. All the promises of the freedom based on the specific system in Hong Kong had all gone. And now Hong Kong is undeniably becoming the police state and totalitarian regime, just like what in mainland China. So I want here to declare two systems are dead, unfortunately. But still, we can see all around of us standing here, all of you wearing the black shirts, showing the solemnity, showing the decency, showing the attitude of the resistance against the abusive power, have embodied the building in front of us. I always emphasize, let not remember hundreds years ago, the revolutionary figures have been detained, have been kidnapped by the Qing dynasties within the same building. So London is always a place to welcome exiles, always the place to welcome all people to believe in the freedom. And we shall to keep that faith. Although all tragedies happen almost every day through the news from Hong Kong. We are all Hong Kongers. We care about the future of Hong Kong. So we would not give up. Because many dissidents, like what we show here through the pictures, all the peoples of filaments are in jail, waiting for us to rescue them someday. That's why nothing can buy our hearts back. No matter how efforts of the United Front Work Department they will do in the UK. Lots of the Chinese overseas students, maybe some of them, maybe some of the journalists working for the state media of China, they will say something good when they memorize 100 years of setting up CCP. But we are the witness. We have the first-hand experience to experience the tortures, to experience the suppression. So only the chance for us who are living in the free world to speak out the truth to the world, to speak out the truth through the international and the free media, to stand against all people who are holding the power abusively, to torture, to abuse it, to govern, to suppress the people. They're intolerant, unforgivable to anyone who are on the upper status of the society, to impose all their totalitarianism around the world. So we are here not only asking or rescuing our filaments back from Hong Kong, but also we need to safeguard the democracy in the UK. We need to safeguard the faith of the freedom, the liberal world order for the world, because we are on the front line. Because if we don't do it, we leave it to Taiwanese. We leave it to others. That's irresponsible. So that's why that's our duty. Every year, memorize this day. That's our set state for Hong Kong. Never forget about it. Thank you. Go for a go! Go for a go! 香港人加油！
Thank you, Simon. We will never forget. Now, please give it up for Luke from EPAC, who will give also a speech.
Hi everybody. Look, it's good to be here among friends. I recognize a lot of people from among you. I know some of you, and I know the sacrifices you made. You know, I came here thinking, I'm going to list the terrible things that the CCP has done over the past 100 years. But apart from not having the time for that, I don't think anybody has the time for that this evening. I realized that there were people here, in this crowd here, you, who have suffered a lot more than me, people who have sacrificed for your freedom, people who have had to face up to the reality of what this government means. And I'm not in a position to lecture you about your suffering, so I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to talk about the UK and the promises that we made to you and the promises that we are failing to honour. We made promises that we would uphold the high degree of autonomy and the way of life of the people of Hong Kong. We made further human rights commitments to Uyghurs, other minorities, anybody who might be suffering under that regime. Where are those promises today? And I want to say this as clearly as I can, because I do not think that this movement grasps it fully. The UK and the international community is failing you, has defaulted on these promises, has not honoured them, is not doing what they promised to do. Where does that leave us? What is the history of these promises that the UK made to you? I don't know if you know this, but back in the early 1980s, while the negotiations were ongoing for the Sino-British Joint Declaration, the UK Foreign Office officials, the UK, they made up aspects of a consultation with the people of Hong Kong to make it seem like the people of Hong Kong didn't care that much about democracy, really. They'd be happy with what was offered to them in the Sino-British Joint Declaration. That's what the UK did even back then. How has the UK honoured the promises since? Well, I think we can see how they've honoured those promises. We have a very, very generous policy for the people of Hong Kong to come to the UK. But I want to ask this one question of you today. What does that do to hold the Chinese government to account for breaking promises that they made that are honoured in a treaty with the UK to the people of Hong Kong? What does it do to hold them to account? And my answer would be nothing. Even today, Dominic Raab, in his statement on Hong Kong, what did he say? The only thing he could come up with was, we have extended an arms embargo. We've extended an arms embargo, so we don't sell the Hong Kong police anymore the instruments of the oppression of the people of Hong Kong. Well, great, wonderful. What has that done to hold China to account for what they have done to the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which is destroy it? My answer would be nothing. So I came here to make an appeal to you today. This is an ingenious movement. This is an energetic movement. This is a movement of extraordinary creativity. I appeal to you today to turn that creativity, that ingenuity, towards the international community and the British government. Because I think when the energy of this movement is harnessed and focused on the promises which are not being honoured to you, then nothing can resist the power of that movement. The UK will not move on those promises unless they are forced. That is very clear to me from being on the front line of the parliamentary movement for a few years. Very clear to me the UK will not move on its promises to Hong Kong unless they are forced. So I appeal to you today. China does not care about its promises to Hong Kong. the international community at least pretends to, the UK at least pretends to, direct your energies towards them. And I say this as clearly as I can, because if you harness the power, the energy of Hong Kongers, you put that together with the power, the energy, the witness, the authenticity of Uyghurs, of Tibetans, of Inner Mongolians, of Falun Gong practitioners, you will have an irresistible force. That's my appeal to you today. And standing together with people like us, who are working at the front line within Parliament to try to change the UK's approach, we will achieve a change. And you will end up in a situation where the UK is at least holding China to account for what they have done to you, to your friends, to your families, to your way of life, to your autonomy in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke. Great word, very powerful statement. And thank you for coming to this celebration also of our fight for freedom. I will now hand the mic to a great friend of now, there is Benedict Rogers from Hong Kong Watch, a brave fighter for Hong Kong freedom here in the United Kingdom. Give it up to Ben.
Quang Phúc Hong Kong, Si Doi Dak Min. Today, for every freedom-loving person in every corner of the world, today is a day of mourning. It may be a day of celebration for the dictators in Beijing. It may be a day of celebration for the people in that building opposite. But for anyone who loves freedom, human dignity, human rights, democracy, today is a day of mourning. When I think, and Luke was right in his message, and you don't need me to tell you what the Chinese Communist Party has done, but it may be worth just reminding some of us. So I am going to list their crimes, not all of them. We'd be here all night and for days if I did, but just a brief reminder. When I think of the 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party, I mourn for the millions, literally millions, that it has murdered. In the Great Leap Forward, in the Cultural Revolution, in Tiananmen Square, in the Uyghur genocide, in the repression of Tibet, in the persecution of Christians, in the persecution of Falun Gong, in forced organ harvesting, forced abortions, forced sterilization, forced slavery. The millions whose lives have been taken from them, have been murdered by the Chinese Communist Party. When I think of the anniversaries that today represents, 4 anniversaries, the 100th birthday of the CCP, the 24th anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong, the 1st anniversary of the imposition of the horrific, ridiculous, draconian, terrible national security law, and the 1st anniversary of the British government's BNO offer. There is one anniversary among those 4 that we can at least have something to be thankful for, but it is tinged with tragedy and regret, and as Luke said rightly, that it does nothing to change the situation on the ground. Nevertheless, it is good that the government did the right thing to offer a lifeline, although it should never have been necessary. But when I think of the other anniversaries, I mourn for Hong Kong. Not because Hong Kong has died, because Hong Kong lives on in the hearts and minds of everybody who loves Hong Kong. Hong Kong is here today in Portland Place. In recent weeks, Hong Kong has been in Trafalgar Square, in Leicester Square, at Marble Arch. So Hong Kong lives on. But the murder of Hong Kong's freedoms, democracy, human rights and the rule of law in total breach of an international treaty is something to be mourned. I think of all our friends who are today either on trial in prison, or you who are in exile. I think of the death of the Apple Daily just last week. But today is not only a day of mourning. Today is also a day of action. Today is a day to say to the whole world, enough is enough. We can no longer keep kowtowing to this mendacious, criminal, inhumane, barbaric, brutal dictatorship. We must stand up. The free world must stand up if our freedoms are to mean anything. Because today it's Hong Kong, but tomorrow it will be London. Tomorrow it will be the UK. Tomorrow it will be the free world. Or maybe tomorrow it will be Taiwan and then the rest of us the next day. So we have to stand up. And I want to end with this simple plea. I want the free world to give the Chinese Communist Party on its 100th birthday a very special birthday present. I want the free world to give the CCP the best possible birthday present from our point of view. And that should be the most targeted, the most robust, the most hard-hitting and the most coordinated sanctions possible. We must urge the British government to lead democracies around the world, to coordinate, to stand together, not to act one by one, where the CCP can divide and rule and play them off each other, but to coordinate and act together, to sanction not just a few officials, which they've done, but to sanction every official who's responsible for the crimes I've outlined, especially for the destruction of Hong Kong's freedoms and the breach of an international treaty, and to sanction those enterprises in China that are complicit with this, those enterprises that are providing the surveillance state and that are complicit with the gravest crimes under international law. And we should also remember, in the litany of crimes of the Chinese Communist Party, I know we're focused here rightly on Hong Kong, but let's not forget the Chinese Communist Party's crimes beyond its borders. The fact that it props up a horrific regime in Pyongyang and sends back, as it has done for years, North Koreans who are fleeing from their lives from North Korea and sending them back to their deaths in that totalitarian state. Or think of Myanmar or Burma, where the Chinese Communist Party has given cover and arms to a brutal military dictatorship that has stolen fragile democracy, very short-lived fragile democracy, from the people of Myanmar. So when we think of the litany of crimes that this regime has committed, let us not endorse or be complicit in any way, but let us give them that big birthday present, the toughest, most robust, most targeted, most coordinated sanctions possible. Guang Fuk Hong Kong, Si Doi Gat Ming, Ga Yao.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for this passionate speech. And I agree, coordinated sanctions from the West are needed. I will now want to introduce Jai Patak from Yet Again UK, a wonderful speaker that spoke in Trafalgar Square last week, and she's gonna tell us more.
As the Chinese Communist Party marks 100 years, we mourn 100 years of atrocity. When I was asked to speak, I thought about what value I could add and what I could talk about. And I think it's really important to allude to what Luke and Ben have said. What can we do as allies here in the UK to support Hong Kongers, to support Uyghurs, to support Tibetans, to support all of those who are victims of the Chinese government? Genocide against the Uyghurs is nothing to celebrate. Oppression against the Tibetans is nothing to celebrate. Aggression towards your neighbors like Taiwan and India is nothing to celebrate. Crackdown on human rights and democracy in Hong Kong is nothing to celebrate either. So what can we do here? We have to choose to stand up to this autocratic regime, and as allies, we have to pick our battles and decide what actions we're going to take to support those who are victims of the Chinese government. In the UK, our government has not done enough. How many more breaches of the Sino-British Joint Declaration need to happen before sanctions are imposed on Chinese and Hong Kong officials? In the UK, we must protect our schools and our universities, protect their rights and their freedom of speech, their freedom of thought, which that embassy over there in that building has tried to crack down on. We must continue to urge our parliamentarians, write to them, remind them that they represent us, they must listen to us and voice our concerns. UK businesses and corporations must not profit from Uyghur slave labour anymore and must be held accountable. As consumers, we must buy smartly. We must buy smartly when and wherever we can. Our local councils must not be using technology that is created and generated by Chinese companies who use this in surveillance against Tibetans and Uyghurs. We need to do more to support those who come here to escape the Chinese government. The threat we face from the Chinese government is real, from the Chinese Communist Party, but there are actionable steps that we can take to make a difference. So we have to take those as allies, use our voices, and speak up. Change starts with each of us, and hopefully some of those actionable steps that I've said that we can take those together to support Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Uyghurs, and all of those who are victims of the Chinese Communist Party.
Thank you so much for this work. Thank you, really. And now I'm very pleased to introduce a Chinese human rights defender, Chao Wang, who is going to tell us more about the crimes of China. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I came after reading Xi Jinping's speech this morning, and I found it's full of lies. As you can see, in recent days, the Chinese authority distributed the little party's flags to everywhere masses are gathering, especially where religions gathering happens, no matter if it's a Christian, Buddhist, or Islamic. Similarly, ahead of today, the Western media or the media around the world reported this upcoming celebration of CCP, and often, no matter what political ideological position the media is, they printed the party's sign of its flag on their papers, which is the hammer and the sickle. However, this sign is no longer representing the labor class, the working class, or the peasants, as the old communist movement of the 19th century. In fact, in the 70 years when CCP ruled the PRC, the peasants, the largest population social group in China, suffered the worst. Millions, by general estimation, more than 30 million of peasants died in the Great Famine caused by the Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s. That was the price Chinese people paid to make China a nuclear power. In the 40 years of reform era, peasants' burden was lifted only temporarily. When the government decided to remove all the agricultural taxes in 2005, they withdraw also from all the social welfare services, education or medical health care. One of the earliest victims of the COVID-19 in January last year was a peasant pregnant woman. Her husband reluctantly signed the agreement giving up all rescuing efforts by the hospital after spending 200,000 renminbi yuan, because they were from the countryside, and he sent his wife and their first expected child to Wuhan, the origin of the pandemic. After the woman died and with her unborn child, 1 day later, the government eventually admitted, yes, this virus is contagious between humans. And the government reluctantly said, yes, the government will pay for medical expenses of COVID patients. This poor family was not included. Similarly, the CCP has betrayed the working class. In the reform era, when China's economy took off, becoming a powerhouse of world economy, the main labor force came from the hundreds of millions migrant workers. Without social security, without health care coverage. And just recently, a young boy of 17-year-old jumped from a high building to his death. He was a student of a professional school, but the school authorities signed a contract with a factory in Shenzhen, sent all class after class to work night shift in the factory for 12 hours per day. The boy was watched and wasn't able to ask for leave because he was threatened to cancel his
Go back! Go back! Brother, go back! Go back! Please, off the road now.
From his teacher, Hong Kong, where is Lincoln? Here it is. Fantastic.
Hello everyone, my name is Lincoln, a member of Justiciar Hong Kong. Our group was created to facilitate activist events, to bring international awareness to the atrocity of the Hong Kong and Chinese government against humanity and democracy. Our work includes lobbying against the Chinese Communist Party's influence in the UK and helping Hong Kongers' integration into UK society. You can find out more information from our social media platform. Before I start my speech, I believe most of you here have heard about the sad news where a person has sacrificed his life today to remind the world that Hong Kongers haven't given up. Therefore, I'd like to invite you here to have a minute of silence in remembrance of him. The 1st of July marks the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. It was claimed to be special because we, the Hong Kongers, were promised to enjoy the one country two systems under the Chinese rule. And they promised us our freedom and the system wouldn't be infringed for 50 years. However, ever since the handover, we were witnessing our freedom, the thing that we cherish the most, being shattered bit by bit by the CCP and their puppets in Hong Kong. The situation in Hong Kong is greatly deteriorating. Protesters are being forced to exile. Teachers who teach materials that is historically unfavorable to the CCP are fired. Journalists are being persecuted and silenced. The leader of Hong Kong is not elected by his people and does not represent Hong Kongers. All of these are conducted under the name of national security. Every year since 2003, Hong Kongers march onto the streets on the 1st of July to exercise their freedom of speech and express their demands to the government. Yet, they are no longer allowed to do so this year under the national security law. Today, we are gathered here in the UK, in London, a place that has over a century away from the horrors of a modern-day cultural revolution. We must remember that the fight is not over, and that it is our duty to protect our new home from the threats of the CCP. While we may no longer march to the Central from Victoria Park, there are still many ways we can contribute to our cause on British soil. We must remind the locals of the dangers from the CCP. We must make them aware that the atrocity that CCP is committing not only to Hong Kongers, but to our friends and allies in East Turkestan, in Tibet, in Taiwan, and other regions. The people from the free world must stand up and voice out for those who are oppressed. As Hong Kongers in the UK, it is also our duty to help defend this island against the CCP, and this is how we can contribute to the country. We shall never surrender. Let me end my speech with a quote from Winston Churchill. We shall go on to the end. We shall defend our island, whatever the cause may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Fight for freedom! Fight for freedom! 光復香港! 光復香港! Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lincoln. Thank you so much for this passionate speech. And now I'm very happy to introduce you to a British politician here with us, because many of our speakers have told you to engage with British politics, pressure the government, because it's the best chance we all have. And so give a big applause to Rabina Khan, a Lib Dem councillor from London.
Thank you so much for inviting me. In fact, this is the second time I've come here outside the Chinese embassy. The last year it was in October. But there's a very good reason why I'm here. Last year I proposed a motion in Tower Hamlets Council to call out the Chinese human rights abuse against the Uyghur Muslims, the Tibetans, and of course Hong Kong. I'm also known as a very difficult woman in Tower Hamlets, but it's good for you. It's good for us standing here together. Now, I don't usually read out a speech, but because of the sensitivity of this, I am going to read this out, and I really want you to listen to this. So Tower Hamlets is a unique and diverse borough. In Tower Hamlets Council, and unanimously voted on a motion to call out the Chinese Communist Party's abuses against the Hong Kongers, against the Uyghur Muslims, and to remember the oppression of the Tibetan community. we also called on, because the relocation will be in Tower Hamlets. And on that notion, we called that we would be renaming streets called Tiananmen Square, the Uyghur Court, the Tibetan Court, the Uyghur Road, and a number of other roads. So what we have done is, on a local level, we are taking action to remember the people of Hong Kong, to remember the Uyghur Muslims, and to remember the Tibetans as well. Tower Hamlets has a long and rich history with Hong Kong. Hong Kong, it dates all the way back to the 1860s when we had the tea trade with Hong Kong and China. But we also recognise, as part of our rights of the East End of standing up for human rights, from when we stood up against the British National Party and standing up for the Jewish community, we also have taken a stance to make sure that when the relocation of the Chinese embassy goes to my borough in Tower Hamlets at the Royal Mint Street site, that motion will become binding, so that we seek to investigate the means and resources to rename roads such as Tiananmen Square, so that we can remember the people of Hong Kong on this day. And I know that this is a day where you believe that you should be mourning, and it is right, but I come to you as a small gesture of hope that in Tower Hamlets, when the relocation of the Chinese embassy goes at the top of my road in my ward, that you will protest just as you have done today. Do you promise? Yes. Do you promise to come to Tower Hamlets when the Chinese embassy comes to you? That as far as I'm concerned, as long as I am a councillor, I will make sure that that motion that was passed unanimously in Tower Hamlets, that we meet and honour that we rename embassy, Uyghur Court, Tiananmen Square, all of that, and Tibetan Road, that we don't forget people like you, people who are part and parcel. On a final note, as a Liberal Democrat, we stand together with the people of Hong Kong, the Uyghur Muslims, the Tibetan community, but we also welcome in Tower Hamlets Hong Kongers, people who are persecuted, those who seek refuge. We are open, the doors of Tower Hamlets are open. Please come. Thank you.
Thank you, Evina. Thank you so much for this. So we are at the end of this protest because, as you all know, in Chinatown there's going to be another even bigger demonstration, so I invite you all to head there as soon as I finish speaking. I'm very proud of our speakers. I'm very proud to see so many of you showing up every time there is an occasion to make your voice heard. This is the way to go if you want to change things in a democracy like the United Kingdom. So keep on going, never stop pushing. I'm the co-founder of now the organization that organized protests every week since a year in front of the Chinese embassy, in front of the 10 Downing Street, and I want to tell you, we will not stop. When you live in a democracy, the best chance you have to change things is the one of demonstrating and protesting until things are changed. And you now live in a full democracy, so take advantage of this right. I'm a European politician. I've done politics for many years, and the only thing the politicians listen to are two things: money, sadly, and people, votes. And you represent votes now for the United Kingdom. So keep on pushing, keep on pushing. And I want to tell you something. As the organization hosting this protest, we are going to soon start a very new important activity, and I invite you to take part in it. We're going to start a political movement standing for freedom and democracy all over the world, meaning bringing our activist demands to politicians, to elections, and ensuring that our voices are not just a little sign, a little line on a political program, but actually a thing that people will vote for and will decide the next leader with. So make your voice heard, participate into politics, ensure the democracy here in the United States, in Europe, wherever is possible, democracy will listen to you. because it's the biggest power we have. Don't let it go. Thank you. Now let's all go to Chinatown together and let's fight for democracy also there. Thank you. Follow the yellow umbrella that is heading to Chinatown ahead of us. Yellow umbrella, move, move. Yellow umbrella stop.